Hey YouTube, what's going on? Abyssal here, and I am proud to say that I finally finished my semester at college, and that means I can dedicate a little bit more time to videos, so I figured I'd come back with a legendary kind of video describing legendaries, where they're good, where they're bad, and kind of their rankings in 3 different settings, which is single target, AoE, and Mythic Plus. So I'm going to be going in alphabetical order, starting with the Acherus Drapes, or Acherus Drapes. So these I gave a C in single target because they just provide no real damage boost besides the slight boost in mastery that they give. And I give them a C in AoE and a C in Mythic Plus. They're pros. They do help with progression because AMS does give us runic power. This basically doubles that amount of runic power, which is kind of nice, which is why they're not an F in single target. An F would be just provides absolutely nothing in that sense. This provides us with a little bit more stats. And if you didn't know that, it does give you double the runic power. It actually does. And that shield is actually really nice for certain things like botanist, where you want to soak a little bit more damage. And it does give extra stats. If there were a 940 regular cape, then this would provide more stats than that cape, which is kind of nice. The cons, though, it does take up a legendary slot. I would rather have bracers, belt, helmet, ring, as opposed to this. And the effects on it provide you with, well, a tiny bit, because it does give you a little bit more runic power, but it really doesn't provide you with much runic power at all, which is basically no damage. So, kind of crap. Next up, we have Aggramar's Stride. Aggramar's Stride I gave just above a B in Mythic Plus, well, above a C in Mythic Plus, and I gave them a B. That's really the only difference between that and Acherus. And the reason I gave it a B in Mythic Plus is because these are actually pretty fun for speedrunning. If you have a pair, you should try just stacking as much mastery as you can, just to have huge Howling Blast and Cinder Ghost of Fury, and run these, and you will run very fast, and you will actually be able to keep up with your group that you're running with, which is the biggest problem for DKs is our movement. So this is actually really fun legendary to use. The problem, though, is it does provide us with absolutely no damage bonus. So that's where it kind of falls flat. But it's still a very fun legendary to use. And try just stacking mastery and running through low Mythic Pluses. You'll have a ton of fun. Next, we have Consort's Cold Core. So as most of you know who saw my Mythic Plus video, I love this legendary because it does provide you with more bonus than you think. You can use these in raid. All that they'll really do in raid is on a boss like Croesus, where the fight lasts approximately 5 minutes, you're going to be getting 3 Cinder Ghost Furies off, as opposed to the 1 to 2. Well, 2 that you would get now with Rune Shields. And actually with Rune Shields, you might even get a 4th one off with this legendary. It's pretty cool in that sense, but it really shines in Mythic Plus. I have this as an S tier in Mythic Plus. The reason that I have this in S, which is the highest that it can be, is because it is amazing. In Mythic Plus, Cinder Ghost's Fury will be in your top 5 most damaging abilities for the dungeon when you sync it up right on such dungeons as Archway, where you're going to be using on huge packs, and even Maul of Souls, where you're also going to be using on big packs in the beginning, but you'll also have it up for the boat for big AoE packs on high Mythic Pluses where stuff needs to die fast, but also needs to be stunned. That's what this is. This also acts as a stun for those. Giving DKs a second stun is absolutely huge. You have Winter is Coming right now, but now you also have Consort's Cold Core for those Mythic Pluses, which makes this incredible. The problem with this legendary is it just doesn't give you a lot of single target boosts. If you use this on raid bosses and regular bosses, having a second Cinder Ghost's Fury for raid bosses is an extra 2 million damage, which almost every other high tier legendary just beats that out completely. So that's where this kind of falls flat. But it is amazing in Mythic Plus, so try it out if you haven't. Next up, we have Kil'Jaeden's Burning Wish. So now I have this as B tier straight down the list. It does give you a ton of stats for a trinket. Now, trinkets, we mostly look at proc trinkets, except for the stat stick trinkets. So we're going to compare this to a regular stat stick trinket. At that level, stat stick trinket would give you approximately those stats, maybe a little bit less on the secondaries. The difference with this is it does give you that huge use effect, and that use effect really shines in high AoE packs. So fights where you want to sheath this trinket is fights like Scorpiron. That's where this trinket would be amazing. Every other fight in Nighthold, this would be absolutely awful. But if you do this in Mythic Plus, and that's why I have this, is I would put this as a B plus Mythic Plus tier legendary. It's just, it doesn't give you as much of an effect as other trinkets, but it does have a ton of strength, which is our huge stat. For DKs, that's your best stat, obviously, is strength. So this is pretty nice in that sense, but that's really all it has going for it. It does take up a legendary and a trinket slot, which really makes it just not that good of a legendary, which is why it's not an A in anything. It's not an A legendary in any of the categories, simply because we can find better trinket plus legendary combinations. So that's where this trinket kind of falls on its face. Now we get into our first really high tier competitive legendary, and that's Kil'Jaeden's Newfound Will. Kil'Jaeden is personally one of my favorite legendaries, simply because it is kind of dynamic in its sense, where it gives you more of one ability, which leads into more of another ability. And I have it as an S tier legendary. I have it as the second best S tier legendary. We'll go into what's the first is, but you can kind of assume what it is. Although I have it as A in AoE and Mythic Plus. And the reason I have it as an A in AoE is because it does lead to more Rhyme procs, which is nice. It gives you more Blizzards, which does in turn lead to more Rhyme procs. The problem with that is they're just better legendaries for that, like Toravons and Ebon Martyr and, you know, other legendaries of that caliber. This just isn't up to tier with those, although it does give you some nice AoE boost. But in Mythic Plus, since you have time to recharge your runes in between fights and you aren't normally starved on resources, this just doesn't reach its full potential, because this reaches its full potential when there are times where you are starved for runes, and this does give you the extra runes in those moments sometimes. Most of the times it just gives you more obliterates, which leads to less of those starvation periods. That's where this legendary really has its advantage. But it does, on average in a raid boss fight, give you approximately 20 to 25 more obliterates, which is huge damage, which does lead to about 10 to 12 more Rhyme procs. So that's where this legendary is really amazing, is on raid bosses. So next up we have Perseverance of the Ebon Martyr. So this legendary was recently changed from 40% increased Howling Blast damage to 20%. So it has fallen quite a bit. 50% nerf is actually huge. And it has hurt its single target. I bumped it down from S to A on single target, because even with the Howling Blast changes as well, this legendary has just taken such a huge hit, because since Howling Blast was changed and actually got a little nerf itself, then this legendary just really isn't as strong as it used to be. Although it's AoE and its Mythic Plus utility is still incredible, and since Howling Blast is about 30 to 35% of your damage in a Mythic Plus dungeon, this is just amazing still for that. It does, however, just not have as big of a place as it used to since the nerf, and if you can, I would recommend using the bracers instead of this in Mythic Plus, but it is still a great legendary to use if you're going to be killing packs very fast, and especially in low Mythic Pluses. So that's where it has its biggest effect. Next up, we have the infamous Prydaz Xavaric's Magnum Opus. This legendary sucks. Sucks because it takes up a legendary slot, doesn't really give you any extra damage on the effect, except for the huge amount of stats on it, admittedly, but it just doesn't give you as much damage as other legendaries do. The plus to this, though, is the shield does hell for bosses that just have a humongous output of damage, such as Croesus on progression. This is one of the legendaries that will help you survive a lot of time on Croesus, provides you with that shield for moments where you're going to be taking huge amounts of damage and not going to be taking little amounts of damage to break the shield. So that's where this kind of has its place, and that's really only where it has its place. Now we have our best legendaries for DKs, Seal of Necrofantasia. Love this legendary. I absolutely love this legendary. For single target, this is just king of all legendaries. It provides you with another Hungering Rune weapon, and if you have a Convergence, you're always going to have a Hungering up for every breath phase afterwards. This is just a super good legendary now, since the changes to legendaries and the changes to the build as a whole. This is amazing. Just for your initial breath on heroism, or when there's an add up, you're going to have 2 hungerings up for that moment, which is super nice. It gives you a ton of stats with the socket and the enchantment slot and everything. It just gives you a crap ton of stats. It's so flexible in Mythic Plus, where you're able to do things like, if you're coming up on a boss but you have a big AoE pack beforehand, you can pop 1 hungering and just go Remorseless Winter, Obliterate, and then just spam Obliterate to get big Gathering Storm stacks and use any Rhyme procs you get, and still have a Hungering up with Breath of Sindragosa for the boss. It's very flexible in that point. If you guys have that this legendary Seal of Necrofantasia, and you haven't done what I just said, try it out. It'll change your life in Mythic Plus. But the problem is in Mythic Plus, low Mythic Pluses to be exact, and that's why this is at an A instead of an S. It just isn't as strong in those low Mythic Pluses because you're just not going to need those 2 Hungerings. Everything melts anyway. You're just not going to get the full effectiveness out of this. And that's the only place where this kind of has a below an S tier. So that's really it. Any other place, this is a super insanely good legendary. Now we have the other crossback legendary, Sephuz's Secrets. So this legendary, after the buff to it, is actually an amazing legendary. And where this legendary shines is in Mythic Plus, where you're able to get that use effect or the proc multiple times. And more on demand than a raid boss. With a raid boss, you're going to have to get it via an interrupt or gripping an ad. And that's just not going to happen most of the time. The only bosses where that's going to happen really are bosses like Crosis, Chronomatic Anomaly, and Elisand. That's really it. Any other boss, you're just really not going to get the effect off. But in Mythic Plus, getting that 25% haste buff is huge. Also, the 2% haste does provide about 800 haste, and the movement speed on it is pretty nice because we do struggle with movement speed as Frost DKs. The problem with it's just not that good on raid bosses where you're really going to want the maximum output of damage. So that's where this kind of falls on its face. But it's still a nice legendary and does provide you with a ton of stats. Last but not least, we have Toravon's Bindings. So this legendary is now in a higher spot than it used to be. It's just amazing in everything except it's a little bit lower in single target. The reason it's a little bit lower in single target is because Cold Tiras and Seal of Necrofantasia just beat it on single target. They're so much better. Sephuz, if you can get the proc consistently, does beat this on single target. This isn't as good as those, but on AoE, this takes over. This is one of the best legendaries for AoE in Mythic Plus. It is huge. That 15% frost damage can be used to sync up with Breath on Pull, can be used to give you a second Pillar of Frost that's pretty strong out of Breath phase, which is kind of nice to be able to keep out your damage when you don't have Breath of Sindragosa up. And you can pair it up with Sindragosa's Fury for huge ad clear. It's amazing, it's flexible, it has insane AoE potential, and it's just awesome. The only problem that I previously stated is it's just not as strong single target, and that's the only place where it kind of doesn't have as much strength as the others. Well, that concludes my video for the legendary review kind of rankings where certain legendaries have their own place. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any opinions, put them down in the comments below, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.